There we go. There we
All
go.
right, awesome.
All right. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Solar United Neighbors. We are a vendor neutral 501c3 nonprofit. Next slide. And our goal, our mission is to go ahead with next slide. Thank you. Is to help people to go solar, to help us join together and bring the resources down so that we can go solar more cost effectively and help educate. And then we advocate, we fight for our energy rights. So we do this in a number of ways. Whether we have group purchasing in co-ops, we call them solar co-ops, or we partner with iChooser and do switch together. We also have a wonderful help desk, and we'll get to more of that towards the end, that can help you go solar on your own. So I think, go ahead with the next slide. I think this is where, yes, we're going to switch to Wally. And we have one announcement. I'm going to introduce Wally, but I think I'm also going to have to say something about his absence. So Wally Calloway has been a member of the Bay Area Unitarian Universalist Church for 10 years. And he was part of the group that directed the installation of rooftop solar on its building. Prior to moving to Houston, Dr. Calloway worked at the Department of Energy's Ergon National Laboratory in Chicago for 31 years as a materials scientist. He has a doctorate in chemical physics from Indiana University. And here's my news, right? I don't see Wally here. Am I correct that he's not? All right, so he's, excuse me, he's not here because his dad is dying, and he thought he's now with his family. And the last I heard from him, he thought he could join us despite all of that. But I'm going to fill in for him. So patience. I actually, I was very involved in them going solar. So I'm honored to fill in for him. So he has 5 steps for going solar, and this is his church down in the Bay Area. And that's the solar. It's on one more roof as well. Okay, next slide. So the first step, 2016 to 2019, no one said going solar with a church or a house of worship is easy, right? First, there's a series of education steps that he took. He made a series of presentations starting about climate change. And I love that they feel there's a moral obligation to reduce their carbon footprint. They educated their congregation about rooftop solar. They educated their congregation about Solar United Neighbors. We were running a co-op in East Houston, or we eventually did, and they took part in that. They researched other churches' solar experiences, just like you are doing now. You're finding out what other churches have been doing, other houses of worship. And then they had people from within their congregation speak at a presentation about their experience personally of going solar. And then out of those presentations, they identified a group that could steer the process. So they recruited a working group in 2018. Next slide. So the results, the resolution, they actually created a church resolution and adopted it, that climate change is real, that they have a moral obligation to act, and that they needed to study what could be done. How could they reduce their carbon footprint? And they looked at everything, right? So low-hanging fruit, and some of the less low-hanging fruit. So conservation, they put in smart thermostats. They increased their energy efficiency by switching over where they could to heat pumps and using LED lights. And then they started researching solar as the next step. Next slide. So they have an all-electric building. So heating, wintertime was actually their highest demand. Their average bill was about $1,000 a month, which, so to me, well, $1,000 a month. And they had inefficient HVAC units and electric heating for winter. So they set a goal to reduce their carbon footprint and have their solar panels sized to do 70% of the total consumption, and then they would work on reducing through conservation the other 30%. Their goal is to be net zero by 2030. Next slide. So in 2021, they've had a pledge drive And they said, look, this is what we want to do. They've educated their congregation, and now they asked for funds to back it up. And they raised through, and I was part of it, I heard part of this, but they had art, like art auctions and bake sales. They did many different ways of raising that money, but they raised $70,000. And then the church, again, had been educated and said, look, you guys did you did a yeoman's job. They matched, or they brought in 30,000. So they were able to raise funds for the solar outright. And then they had their installer selected through Solar United Neighbors. And that was, we do we help the co-op, the cooperative, the solar co-op go out to bid. And then it's members of the co-op, including people from the Bay Area UU Church, sat on the selection committee. It's a one night, 3 hour type where they really research the responses, and collectively they pick which is the best installer. And they chose Greenlight Solar. Green Mountain Energy was at the time the installer that did their work for them. And what's pretty cool, I think, is this co-op was open to residents and small businesses, and in this case, the church. 5 congregational members also joined the co-op, hopefully went solar. So pretty exciting that it affected more than just the building, it affected the members too. Next slide. So there's an aerial view. It's 115 panels. Each panel is 385 watts. So it's a 44.3 kilowatt array. It produces 60 megawatt hours a year. And on a sunny day, they can get 200 kilowatt hours a day. So that's their the stats about their array. And is there another slide? So we have COVID in the middle here, but you can see they started doing conservation measures, and then there was COVID, and then the solar started kicking in. It got installed in 2021. So now you're seeing the results, their carbon footprint. Now, when Wally was telling us about these slides when we were practicing for this webinar, he's like, but while the congregation was educated and they want to reduce their carbon footprint, they really wanted to know how much money they're saving. And so the next slide shows that not quite as dramatic, because there's distribution charges that we pay to CenterPoint. They're fixed charges, and those have actually, from Storm Uri and all, they've gone up. So the consumption, you can see, has dropped. The overall bill hasn't dropped as much. But again, this church went solar for the climate and for reducing their carbon footprint, mainly. Okay, and I think, is that the last slide? Okay, encouraging others to go solar. So they have made a point of, they haven't hidden their light under a bushel, so to say. They made a point of letting people know about what they've done. It's news on their church website. They've done interviews, and like this, they're willing to do presentations. Wally is very approachable, and is happy to help others too. So if you have specific questions we don't answer tonight, there'll be a time when he'll be available again. They remain a resource for their church members and for other churches. And Solar United Neighbors has used, I've relied on Wally before for helping to spread the word. So they're a good source of information. I think what's next? Yeah, okay. So I think what we're going to do is have questions at the end. So again, reminder to go ahead and put your questions in chat, and we'll answer them as best we can. But we're going to go ahead and move on, except here's the other challenge. Leroy, we might be getting to you sooner than later. So our other panelist, Ron Cookston, which I'm not sure why we don't see him yet, but Ron Cookston is the immediate past president of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston. And for the last 5 years, their congregation has focused on greening their campus, surviving the shutdown as a result of COVID, and reopening their facility while remaining committed to their values. As a congregation, they procured a loan made possible by Texas PACE, the Property Assessed Clean Energy, Authority to procure a loan to replace their old and inefficient air conditioners. They replaced all their lighting from incandescent fluorescent fixtures to LED bulbs. They've sealed their doors and windows, and they installed a solar system of 162 panels. And Jasmine, I think we can go back to the original slide and we can see a picture of that church. It's not it. So we're not yet seeing the slide yet. It's a nice rooftop, but it's not the church. But it's a good example of a rooftop getting solar on it. Nope. Nope. So back to, yeah. We're seeing an agenda. All right. Well, anyway, so let me just tell you about Ron.
I'm sorry,
and again,
Dory, did you want
Yep.
us to run slides?
I wanted to go back to my slideshow, and the one after Wally's slide is a picture of Ron's church.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Jasmine. So Ron, and first he reached out to Wolf Energy. I'm an independent contractor with Sun, and Wolf Energy has helped others to go solar, like unique projects. Sun can now help with unique projects right in-house. But Ron reached out to me, and this is a picture of their church. This is not actually how they ended up going solar, but it's the precursor to, it was the proposal to say, how might they go? I know that they ended up putting solar on this sanctuary roof that's not shown there. So they had 2 campuses. They had a lot of initiatives to do. They were closed down for COVID, and yet they knew once they opened up that their air conditioning units were broken and not working, and it was a crisis, right? So the beauty of working with property assessed clean energy PACE program is that you can get out a long-term loan over the life of all the products, the HVAC units, the lighting, and the solar, and together it has to be engineered. You have to hire an engineer to make sure that together all the work that is designed, is planned, is cash flow positive year one, that there's a return on the investment. So you take out the loan, but you're saving money throughout that loan process. And so Ron has a very similar trajectory that Wally had as far as path to bringing his congregation along. Very supportive minister that helps, and a stable congregation that helps. But he had a working group, a committee that researched all the different alternatives, presented it before the finance committee. He brought people along, and then he went out, he got his own, he went out to bid and got his own proposals and researched them and chose which installer he wanted to go with. Again, the financing was through PACE, so that had to be, aligned. But once they got that approval through PACE, it paid for the engineer, it paid for the HVAC units. And just a trick of the trade, he really needed to get those HVAC units first. And by letting PACE know that you want to go the PACE program, they were able to get reimbursed for the HVAC units, even though the PACE hadn't been finally secured. So just a word for wise, if you want to use PACE, bring them on earlier if you have work that needs to get done sooner than the solar. And he mentioned when we last talked that he was still waiting for the direct pay. He had applied for the direct pay, which for nonprofits, that's a new rule. You can actually get that 30%, potentially more, like federal incentive tax credit. You can get it as a nonprofit. It takes upwards of 18 months, though, to get back that 30%. I didn't do near as well as Ron would have done, so I apologize for that. Um, but I think what we'll do, and we can stop showing, Leroy, you don't have slides, you're just gonna talk, is that correct?
I actually have slides.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect,
I
then
think
we'll
they
make
were
sure, okay, we'll make sure you're host. I'm gonna introduce you first, though. Um, Leroy Awinahi is esteemed Chief Executive Officer of Solavad Consulting. He has distinguished track record in the clean energy sector. His notable contributions include spearheading the development of innovative funding solutions for the clean energy program at St. Philip's School and Community Center. In addition to his executive role, Leroy holds a prestigious position on the board of Green Careers Texas. This nonprofit organization is dedicated to democratizing access to clean energy jobs by providing comprehensive training to individuals from diverse backgrounds. Leroy, it's all yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Um, do you mind? I don't mind sharing my slides, but I saw one of your team members. Okay, I can actually share the slides on my end. I think I have the host capabilities now. So, okay, can you guys see my screen by any chance? Okay. The nod sounds like a yes to me, so I'm just going to keep on going right now.
Yes, we can.
So, thank you very much. So, the agenda of my presentation is I'm just going to give a little bit a high level overview of my organization, a little bit of like market context of where the project is located, the particular client I helped with their current energy program, and just kind of review some policies and some programs that are aiding like, this clean energy access. So, all of that, our main to help communities, organizations, and businesses increase access to energy with the goal of reducing energy costs and energy burdens. We typically try to do this by data human-centered solutions. And the main goal is to be able to be as collaborative as possible to connect a lot of businesses, ideas, and people for greater impact. Over here are just a few of our services. We do energy management, energy procurement, some utility bill monitoring and analysis, technical asset management, energy efficiency consulting, measurement and verification, a few to name. So as of right now, I'm about to go into the market research for this particular project. So right now, this project is located in the southern part of Dallas. And South Dallas is historically significant area, which is roughly about 3 miles from downtown Dallas. It's known for its rich cultural heritage and it's home to a lot of several important landmarks. But from what we've seen, this particular area in the bottom right over here of this graph that we can see, this is the southern part of Dallas. We can see that, this area recently has been characterized by high rates of poverty and unemployment. So several zip codes in the southern part of Dallas have about 30 to 40% of its residents living in poverty. So the project where this particular southern part of Dallas, I implemented this project in the 75215 zip. And from what we can see, like, a large proportion of, so let me see if I can first, okay. So a large portion of the community have like are living below the energy poverty line, and we can see that is a very highly minority based community with over 70% of Over 70% of the residents are either Black or Hispanic dwellers. So now, this is the name of the organization that I worked with to develop their clean energy program. So St. Philip's School and Community Center, they are a Christian nonprofit school in the southern part of Dallas. They provide a lot of funding to help, students attend the school. There are a lot of grants towards the tuition at the school. And, the school, what I like so much about them is that they have their teachings and their principles are very Christian focused. They have various educational programs, and at the same time, they're also a very big pillar in the community. So in the community, they provide a lot of social services, enrichment programs, and recreational activities that help to improve the lives of people living in the neighborhood. And as mentioned initially, they do have their nonprofit arm of the organization. So this right here is just like, the energy program timeline for this organization. So, by October of 2022, we had already completed a facility energy audit and we are able to identify, various opportunities for energy savings. So during that period, by December of 2022, we decided to implement an energy efficiency program. Since the school is new from our initial audit, about 97 to 90% of their lighting are LEDs. So where we identified like a majority of the majority of the savings for the customers through an implementation of a built-in automation system that that controls most of their equipment from a central location, has most of the equipment on the timer, and really focuses on like reducing a lot of the humidity that they're seeing at that particular building. So, once we implemented this program in December 2022, the next step was just that, the organization also has, in addition to it, when they constructed the building, they had pre-retrofitted the building for most of the solar wiring. So I know that a goal of theirs was to, have solar on their campus. But one thing, at the time, I know one of the earlier panelists spoke about the PACE finances. I know that was one that we had introduced towards the organization, primarily because, that is a very good funding technique. But at the same time, this particular organization, they do a lot of capital campaigns, a lot of donations. So any particular project, they would rather just get either a donation or not any type of loan. So just to kind of go back towards the energy efficiency program, so what had happened was that the contractor where I had brought in, what they had done was they had estimated that, okay, they're going to see about a 20 to 30% savings on their utility bills, but there's going to be no upfront costs to implement the smart thermostats, the building automation system. But what is going to happen is that there's going to be a continuous monthly measurement and verification process that verifies the savings each month. And what happens is that the organization will now pay the contractor 80% of the savings until their initial investment has been paid off. And then from there, the school continues to enjoy the savings from the energy efficiency upgrade. So as we're going through that measurement and verification process, knowing that, okay, this organization does not take any particular loans, I'd reached out to, various people within my network. So I had got connected with a hedge fund who was actually looking to make a donation. He was actually has very strong Christian principles and he didn't just want to make any type of donation, but he wanted to donate towards an organization that had a cause who was actually doing a lot of work for the community. So when we connected and all the executives spoke, he was very, very happy to make this particular donation towards the system, towards the campus. So by January of 2024, we installed a 150 kW system on the main campus, and we were waiting for the interconnection agreement. And as of March, we got the interconnection agreement approved. During this time frame too, as they were excited about the solar, we had some classes for the sixth grades, teaching them all of what clean energy is, the impacts of having solar, and just teaching them about the concept of the energy transition. They were very interested and very happy for this particular training that was offered to them. So right here shows the 3D scope of work that we had implemented on their main campus. So in their main campus, we installed a 150 kW system, so which consists of 280 panels, each of them about 545 watts. So on the DC side, we're sitting about 125.6 kW. And on the AC side, we have 350 kW SMA inverters at this particular facility. So over here, we're just looking at from 2022 to date. So from what we can see in the presentation, we can see that there has been a significant decline in the energy consumption that is being taken from the grid. Because what typically happens is just that, the system serves the load first, and if there's any excess energy, it's sent towards the grid. So we can see that the reliance on the grid energy has significantly reduced, both from the electrical consumption and also from the demand consumption. So we're currently seeing a constant decline, apart from in January of this year, there was a major spike. But at the same time, from what we know from the demand side of the utility bills, they typically take the peak demand in a month. So that is why it's always very good to focus on load management. Looking at the bill, we can see that electrical consumption is about 55% of the bill, and then 40% of the bill is really toward the demand charges, while the remaining 5% is going toward taxes and some minor other fees. So just looking on the left side, we see that, they have between 2022, so this analysis, since I've only had about 10 months of data in 2024, so I took the consumption between January to October ending of 2022 and compared the carbon emissions then from January of 2024 to October 2024. And we can see that the main campus itself has reduced his carbon emissions by 70%, which is equivalent to 333 metric tons. And this is equivalent to over 776 barrels of oil, or 72 passenger cars operated each year. On the right side of the screen, you can basically just see like how, for the most part, year over year, apart from 1 or 2 minor months, the consumption has dramatically been reducing and reducing over time. So right here, I'm going to talk about a few of the energy policies and programs that are available for most people who are considering going solar. So, one, most people are probably familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act. This was just a legislation to help tackle inflation, promote clean energy, and reduce healthcare costs and implement tax reforms. So most of these Inflation Reduction Act focus primarily to help with climate change and clean energy, economic growth, and really support for underserved communities. And when we talk about that support for underserved communities, we can now see that there was another initiative that basically said that, hey, we've invested so much money in this Inflation Reduction Act. There's now this special initiative, which is basically called the Justice 40 Initiative. And this is basically just saying that it is aimed at addressing all the environmental justice and climate change mandates that at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investment goes towards what they classified as disadvantaged communities. And from what we could see earlier, um, the southern part of Dallas it has a lower AMI, has a lot more residents in the below the federal poverty level. And there's another program called Solar for All, another program which has helped to increase access to solar energy. And through the nonprofit where I sit on at Green Careers Texas, we're also trying to get some funding to also increase access towards clean energy training. And the main objectives really are to promote environmental justice, economic opportunity, reduce energy costs, and enhance energy resiliency. Um, I know earlier they also kind of spoke about direct pay, so I'm not going to go very too much into it. So direct pay kind of came about sometime last year, if I'm not mistaken. So this is just basically a provision within the Inflation Reduction Act that allows tax exempt entities, which includes nonprofits, churches, and the main reason why most of us are here today, to basically access the clean energy tax credit in the form of a direct cash rebate. So this has been a changer because for the most part prior to like to the ITC and everything, most tax exempt organizations have not had the opportunity to claim this tax benefits. And also going into like, being in an underserved community, that 30% can also increase basically depending on like, okay, if you're working in a particular community, if that community is classified as a Justice 40 disadvantaged community, you can have additional tax breaks from that perspective. A few benefits is really just to help relief, provide a lot of financial relief, and also increase a lot of sustainability goals. And from an eligibility perspective, it's not only open to nonprofits, but also open to state and local governments, tribal nations, and other tax exempt entities. You know, how it works is really just an application process, and then most of the application process should be straightforward. And then, during the application process, it just basically helps you to identify whether you're eligible for the credits and understand the necessary documentation required for it. And for the type of projects they look at, these projects vary from clean energy upgrades, such as solar installations. Just any type of project can help lower monthly bills and and help reduce the energy burdens that certain communities do face. I believe that is the end of my presentation. Thank you guys very much.
That is amazing, Leroy. You went through a lot of material and I appreciate it. The detail is great. So this part of our program, I'm going to lead off with some questions, and Leroy, you're going to be in the seat the whole time. So here's the first question. What was the major obstacle, if you were to look back, that you faced during the process that you had not foreseen in helping St. Philip's get solar?
All right, can you repeat that one more time?
Yep. What was a major obstacle? What was one of the obstacles that you faced during the process of helping St. Philip's go solar that you had not foreseen? And maybe you had foreseen it all.
So I would say that there are two major things. First and foremost, like around the time when I thought about the solar project, I was, very excited because I heard about like, all the tax credits and all the rebates and like the PACE program. All these are very smart initiatives, but for one, the organization do not take loans. So that was, the first constraint. So when I started looking for grants, it wasn't easy because a lot of organizations who give grants not like to give religious institutions or religiously affiliated organizations. So the second bottleneck that I kind of ran into. But at the same time, when I realized that, like, okay, why am I not looking for specific organizations who are faith-based and want to contribute towards organizations who are more Christian and faith-based? So that was where I kind of moved my direction towards when looking for organizations to partner with for funding.
That is great. And the next question, and we know the answer. You told us, how do you approach financing your project? You just said, what's amazing is that you found a donor, right? So 100% donation, or was part of it funded at all? Tell us more about that donation process.
And then Okay, so for the donation process, so what had also happened too, because of the location of where St. Philip's is, it's in an economically disadvantaged community. So with that being said, like most times when any donors to make a donation towards a nonprofit, they get tax credits and rebates back, and they get a lot of tax credits. But also because of the Inflation Reduction Act, what the organization is basically trying to do is basically to show like he owns the system. So the way we had structured the agreement was just that we would pay a rate of the energy produced towards the organization, which is much cheaper than what we pay to the grid. So probably in the next 3 to 6 years, let me say 5 to 6 years, when he's able to officially claim his credits, then the system would be fully donated towards the organization.
All right, that makes sense, and that makes a lot of sense. So yes, they do. If your donor is now owning it for the first 5+ years, it has to be at least, it has to be 5.5 or so to allow that tax credit to stand up and be strong. So then he, and I just, for the people viewing, there officially, when you make these kind of arrangements, the system gets flipped over back to the St. Philip's, for example. By paper, on paper, it has to be at fair market value. So there's a value at which it gets flipped, but then this the financer, the owner of the system, before he flips it, can make that donation, but can't go in writing. Don't put that in writing anywhere. Just that's the assumption. All right, that's exciting. Okay, so it sounds like you didn't go to a green bank, but again, just letting folks know that there's a Texas Clean Energy Fund. There are green banks in and around in Texas and around that are motivated to help with loans. But again, if your St. Philip's wasn't going to take a loan, then this is an excellent approach to take. Question: what do you wish you knew then that you know now? Is there anything you learned that would help those of us listening?
So, one thing I would say is just that, for the most part, it didn't really bite us as much, primarily because, the facility, like, even though we installed a 150 kW system, like, I would say when I first did my model, the solar system was only going to serve about, like, 10 to 15% of the load prior towards the energy efficiency upgrade. So now with the energy efficiency upgrade, we're seeing it serve a larger proportion of it. So if I was able to attract more funding to develop a system to serve either just as much, then I feel like we would not see as much savings, primarily because we don't have a one-for-one net metering agreement here in Texas. And what that basically means is that right now the system is set up that the system is going to serve most of the load on the campus. So let's say the campus closes by 5 p.m. and the solar system is producing to 7 p.m. And between that 5 to 7 p.m., the energy will be at the grid. But the difference now is just that throwing out high numbers, if we're buying energy from the grid at 6 cents, they're paying us only 1 cent for the energy we export. So that is a constraint that I could see that could potentially affect, some solar development projects in the area.
Yeah, Texas is not an easy place, or at least the deregulated parts of Texas that we're in Dallas and Houston. There's not an easy place to get fair value for your credit. And I will talk about what Sun's working on at the end. But let me see, and Jasmine, you can interrupt me anytime. I'll just go through a couple more questions and then we'll get to our audience questions. So it sounds like, Leroy, they brought you in as consultant. Do you know what work they did, the St. Philip's did, before they contracted with you? Were you part of how did they speak to their congregation? How did they incentivize people to want to go this route?
So, for one thing is that what I like about solar right now is just that when you look at solar 10 years ago, most people who got solar 10, 15 years ago, they were purely just the I love the community. I want a green community. I'm reducing carbon emissions. But now solar, especially with the right policies, is getting towards that point that it is not only good for environment, but also financially feasible. So on one end, they're happy because it's aligned with their mission of reducing carbon emissions. But on the flip side, while talking with the CFO and everybody, like, yeah, it's saving money. So, like I said, like, even though we technically have like a payment arrangement with the donor, but the rate is still cheaper than what we would spend. Even if we were to still continue paying them for over 20 years, but it's still cheaper than what we'll buy from the grid.
Yeah, I call it cash flow positive, month one even, right? From the get-go. And I really like how you handled the energy conservation solutions, in that they're always going to be cash flow positive because you're paying for those energy efficiencies from the savings. So that's always going to be a savings. All right. though this is great. I think, and it may, from looking at the chat, there may not be, go ahead, Jasmine, or Trinity, are there any questions that you'd like to bring up to us?
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat.
Okay, all right. Well then, oh, here we go. We have one. Hi, Lisa. There you go. For you, Leroy, does Solavad work only in the Dallas area?
No, right now we do work in like, most of the Texas area right now. And most of our contractors are all spread out, throughout the state. So the energy efficiency program, the contractor I'd use is actually based in Dallas, Texas, while the installer I use is actually based in Houston, Texas.
And Lisa, I am going to share more about all that Sun and Interfaith are doing. Here we go. Another question. Does Solavad only, oh no, has Solavad been involved in any community solar farms?
So the community solar farms is actually an initiative that I am trying to work on, but at the same time, it's something that I feel like is still on my mind subconsciously, but I'm trying to pivot towards other, agendas, maybe more of like a distributed energy resource aggregation. And the reason why I say that is I'm a very big supporter of like, community solar. I have a network of nonprofits who are willing to work, but my only issue is that being in this market, we have too many REPs, which are retail electric providers. So in order to develop that particular solution, we would have to make sure everybody gets towards one REP, and then we're going to negotiate with the utility from that perspective. So that is something that I'm still working on, but I'm also just trying to evaluate other options like DERs and like virtual power plants.
And DER, distributed energy resources, and then DPPs are distributed power plants. And yeah, it is a hard nut to crack. True community solar without those long range contracts and regulation. Good question, Juan. Thank you for that. Any others? And we will share with, I believe, Jasmine, you'll share with folks after the webinar that you share contact information so people can get a hold of Leroy. All right, then, Jasmine, let's go back to my slides if we could. And just another plug for Solar United Neighbors. And that is that we do have a great help desk, and you can get one-on-one help support without bias, in the sense that we don't represent any one installer. We recommend you go out to bid. And we have in-house, Leroy is a better resource, right, for long-term project from beginning to end, but we can help with some special projects in-house too. And so check out the help desk, and I think Jasmine's going to put, yep, there she goes. The link is in the chat. And then we also had mentioned in the beginning, as you're educating your congregations, your houses of worship, as Wally did, you can help your members also consider solar too. And so to that end, I'm just going to share with you about our Solar Switch group purchasing campaign. The next one will launch at the end of first quarter, late March, early April. It is a group process. It's free to join. There's no obligation to purchase. Actually, you don't even join. It's free to sign up. You get your own personalized recommendation. It's at a great price because, again, we bring down the price by doing it as a group. It's still about the 6 to 8 month process for going solar. But the installer, rather than having a selection committee like the co-op, the installer is pre-vetted and reverse bid auction chosen by iChooser, a for-profit company that we partnered with that has done this work, starting in the Netherlands, Europe, and now in the United States. Yes, and even though it doesn't happen until the spring, you can go ahead and give them your information and they'll put you on the waiting list for it. And yeah, but ultimately, even though we call it group purchasing, you will sign your own individual contract with the selected installer. So that's a good thing to know about. And as Wally did with, I've got two other things I have to remember to mention. As Wally mentioned, he did it through COP. This solar switch does work for small businesses. If you're like Leroy's side, 150 kilowatts, Ron's size was 50. At some point, you're going to do better pricing by going out to bid with a commercial installer rather than through a small business residential. So that I want to share. And then the other thing I wanted to give a shout out is that say you want to convey the basics of solar to your house of worship, the members. So as part of your education process, bring them along. Jasmine's going to put a link to a Solar 101 that we recently created for our work in Northeast Houston. It's got some Spanish subtitles too, and it's a YouTube, so you can get Spanish captions. And it's just a good kind of grounding, but let's make sure we're talking the right language. We throw out a lot of acronyms, we throw out a lot of terminology, and so that helps. So Solar 101, I encourage you to share with your houses of worship. And then when you're got your committee and you're ready to dig down into the details, the Interfaith Environmental Network of Houston, and I know Lisa is here on the call, they have put together a really comprehensive slide deck of the nuances of the different opportunities of financing and of the direct pay like Leroy went into. So I encourage you to check out that slide deck, and I think Jasmine will put a link in the chat for that as well. And so, yeah, so I think that ends our evening. Are there any last, Leroy, do you want to leave us with any pearls of wisdom, or is there any last questions? We have a little bit of time.
Personally, thank you guys very much for having me. And, just to add, Solar United Neighbors are doing a lot of work for the community and just for people going solar. So I just look forward to continued partnerships and increasing our networks.
Thank you, Leroy. And yeah, there's a lot of work we have. Sun is involved in Solar for All projects in many states, including Texas. So let's just fingers crossed that we can keep those funds. Thank you for the links, that we can keep those funds coming. All right. Is there anything else, Jasmine? Do you think we're good to go?
I think so. And I just want to say also, if you missed any of these links, just be on the lookout for an email tomorrow and we will have all of that stuff linked there for you.
Thank you. And thank you again, Sun staff. All right. Have a good evening.
Have a good one.
And yes, the webinar won't be posted. It will be sent to you, and then you can do with it what you will.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All righty.